Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. And with me on the line, is almost always is the case, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. We only had the one show last week, and kind of so go from there is now we get to talk about the draft. We've got day 1, day 2, day 3. The Cardinals had a gazillion picks. They had 12 picks in this draft, and with that came a lot of picks all over the place. Had a couple of trades, but what we want to do first, Seth, let's break down our mock draft that we did last week, because the mock draft, I mean, there was some wild stuff, and we'll get into the Cardinals stuff, but just talking about the first round, we came away with pretty good numbers. Both of us hit on team and pick for 7 players. It was not only player went to team at the pick that we picked on 7 of them. You also had one that was you pegged the team but not the pick number, and you had another where you nailed the pick number but not the team. I had 7 as well that were team and pick, and then I had 3 other ones that the team it hit with the team. So overall, 8 and 10 player to team picks, pretty good. I think it was one of our better years, but I think it was also because of the fact that the top of the draft was pretty predictable.
Yeah, I mean 1 through 6 was basically chalk. Pick 7 was chalk in the sense of everybody knew what the position was. I think we were a little surprised, but not overly surprised that it ends being J.C. Latham that went 6 overall.
Yeah,
or 7th overall.
I was surprised that Latham ended up being the second lineman pick. You were dialed in on that, on having the Chargers not trading, and the Chargers locking in with Alt, which is an interesting move because the left tackle is going to have to play right tackle, and apparently that is in fact the plan for them, is to have Alt play left tackle, Thrayshawn Slater playing the left side, and that's probably going to work out all right, I would guess.
Yeah, and so you look at it from there, it became chaos because the Atlanta Falcons did something unimaginable, unthinkable,
right.
Unfathomable.
We had defensive, it was pass rusher, and then the late buzz was, hey, it's Raheem Morris. They're going to go Byron Murphy. No, they went Michael Penix, and that just went. And honestly, the scenario where I had the Cardinals trading up to get Dallas Turner, when Atlanta picked that, I was 100%. I totally wanted the Cardinals to make the move to get one of those edge rushers, whether it was Latu or Verse or Dallas Turner, because they were going to be in the range to do it, because the Falcons went with Michael Penix and the quarterback instead of a pass rusher, which we all thought, we had locked into that pick for a long time, that they were going to go pass rush.
Right, and to see Penix go, there was some movement late in a gambling Discord I followed of Penix being a top 10 pick, which was plus 3,500, which
Ooh.
is, for those that are not paying attention, that's massive numbers. And so I was so locked into finishing getting prepped for the draft that I didn't actually have a chance to bet it. And so I missed it. And so that was frustrating because that's definitely something, I would have thrown
But
$5 on.
Yeah, it's worth sprinkling something on there.
Yeah, $5 to win 175. You can't complain about that. So it was one of those situations that somebody got tipped off about something. And I don't know if it was that teams felt like that's who the Vikings were going to trade up for, or if teams felt like that's who the Broncos were going to, but somebody
or the Raiders
or even Seattle, right? Because there was rumors that Seattle.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Seattle, especially with their coordinator who had coached Penix, it was a perfect fit.
So, that happened. So I think if you're dialed in to like the gambling community, you might have had an inkling that Penix was going to be the fourth quarterback off the board. I don't think you would have ever taken the chalk because the pick, so like plus 3,500 means if you bet $100, you win $3,500, a lot of money. To be the 8th pick was plus 11,500.
Holy cow.
So
I'm surprised there were any odds on that at all.
$1. Well, I mean, but that's how they make money, right? They get somebody to throw, they get, 1,000 people to throw $5 on plus 10,000 odds and hoping that they're going to win, $500 on a $5 bet. And this time it happens. And I would guess that maybe, 20 people place that bet. So it's not like it was a lot and things like that. So, it's just people, I will say people had an inkling that he was going to go top 10. Nobody had it that he was going to go 8th overall, especially to the Falcons sitting at 8th overall, because those odds are that, I mean, that's literally like $1 wins you $110. Like that's that type of bet. And that's just unfathomable in that situation. So, after that, it really kind of opened our eyes, I think, just to the overall, what's the word I'm looking for? Like what people actually thought of this draft. Because if you go, and we're not going to go through every single pick, but, you look at it, Rome Odunze went 9. And there had been murmurs, whispers all week, right? That like, oh, they're going to take Byron Murphy. Oh, it's Matt Eberflus. He's going to get his interior pass rusher, blah, blah, blah. And what do? They just sit and take Rome Odunze, chalk, right? The Vikings make a small trade up from 12 or from
11 to 10, which tells you Oakland or somebody was trying to go up.
Right. And so they take J.J. McCarthy. All this conversation about Brock Bowers, right? Brock Bowers. And the Jets go chalk and take Ola Fashanu. Great pick, by the way. Like,
yeah. The question is, where's he playing this year?
Right, exactly. And then I don't know if it was a shock because I think it ended up being the betting favorite, Jess. But Bo Nix went 12. And
when you had 6 quarterbacks going to the top 12 and then all offensive players going for the first 13, everyone's like, what is happening?
First 14, Jess.
14, that's right, because Fuaga went to New Orleans.
Yeah, we nailed that. I don't think either one of us had any inkling that Bowers would go to the Raiders. Like, even if he was there, I think you and I both were like, he'll probably make it to the Colts at that point. Maybe down to
I thought he was a lock
Bengals.
For the Jets. Honestly, I thought he was a lock for the Jets because...
Especially when they moved back that one spot, right? You kind of just felt
right. They're in a win now mode. They already have tackles that they signed in free agency. And I'm like, Fashanu's a great pick. But you're like, wouldn't it make sense to give Aaron Rodgers somebody to throw the ball to instead of Fashanu? And unless you're just hedging against someone getting hurt, I don't know.
Right. Well, let's be honest. Tyron Smith hasn't played in a long time, or for 18 games or 17 games for a long time. But yeah, Taisi Fuaga goes 14. I think one of us called that. I can't remember.
That was my pick there. But
And then I think we were both shocked to see Latu go at 15, not because he went at 15, but more like I don't know if anybody really saw the Colts taking him, right? Like
right,
everybody was kind of locked into
we're
the
locked in
wide
cornerback.
receiver or corner, right?
Yeah.
And then 16 Byron Murphy. I got the position right. I picked Johnny Newton. I got the position right though. Byron Murphy. I had a inkling based on people I talked to that if they didn't get the quarterback, they were going to take an interior disruptor. So, and then the Vikings make the move you wanted to make, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They move up and so the Vikings had themselves a good first round, being able to get the quarterback, being able to get the top what many believe is the most talented edge rusher in Dallas Turner. Like, I lamented the Cardinals not doing that, but I mean, and we'll get to the Cardinals stuff in a minute, but just the first round was kind of fun. It was honestly, it was a fun first round.
And then you look at, like, people, like you said, will lament that the Vikings didn't go get, or that the Cardinals didn't do what the Vikings did. But the Vikings basically made the same trade that they were going to have to make to ensure that they got both those guys. And it's just, and we saw that it worked out for the Texans for the most part, but the Texans already had a second first round pick because of their trade of Deshaun Watson. And so, it's a lot different for the Vikings because the Vikings gave up virtually what they would have given up just to go get the quarterback. And so people will go, well, that's not bad. But in reality, it's like, man, if either McCarthy or Dallas Turner don't turn out, that's what this class hedges on, right? Like those guys both have to turn out. And like you said, though, that's what makes it fun. I did hit one bet, Jess, and I think you would like this. It was a plus 1,500 that exactly 6 quarterbacks, which I knocked those out quick, Jess. I mean, that went, like you said,
that was a no stress bet.
Half of them were quarterbacks. Yeah, but the second part of it was the sweat, and it was really interesting because it was exactly 6 quarterbacks and exactly 7 wide receivers drafted in the first round.
Ooh.
And the 49ers and Panthers really did me a solid to make sure I got there, because I don't think anybody in this world saw Ricky Pearsall going 31st overall.
No one saw Ricky Pearsall as a first round. I can talk myself into it, but just the fact. Okay, I will say this: A.D. Mitchell not going in the first round. What the crack? I don't understand.
Well, and that's why a lot of people lament things, right? They say, oh, you should have done this, you should have done X, Y, Z, whatever. It's really interesting when you look at drafts, and especially teams that did well or whatever, graded out well, which we'll get to about the Cardinals doing exactly that. But you look at a team like the Indianapolis Colts and their first 2 picks, and they take Latu and A.D. Mitchell, and everybody goes, holy cow, that's a great start to the draft, right? Like, and they just kind of let the draft fall to them. Yeah, they went up in the second round and got AD, and that, that makes sense. Oh, no, they moved back, I believe, right? That's right. The Rams went up to get Braden Fisk, and they moved back a little bit.
Which also, what a Rams pick, right?
Right, but you look at what they did. They just kind of sat pat. Matt Goncalves is he is what he is. But like, they got one of Sully's favorite guys, Tanner Bortolini, in the 4th round. Like, a lot of people really like when guys just sit and pick. And then you have the Rams, like you said, they got Jared Verse at 19, and then they got super aggressive. Quite frankly, I don't know what they're doing. I love Braden Fisk, don't get me wrong, but like, that was a very, very aggressive pick to go up and get Braden Fisk in the 2nd round. And then they kind of go interesting in round 3, because they take Blake Corum and Cameron Kitchens, and you and I are Corum fans, don't get us wrong, but I think he was the third running back off the board at that point. But the Cameron Kitchens pick, that's an interesting one, right? Because you're talking about a really unathletic safety, but they've seemed to do a good job with those guys in the past. So, every team gets graded, based on what somebody had on their board and how people felt that they did. But I'm gonna tell you, Jess, as we get into the Cardinals, I think we're learning a little bit more about Monty Ossenfort and how much of a New England Patriots disciple he truly is.
Yeah, absolutely. I will ask this, because it deals with the Ricky Pearsall pick. People are saying, "Oh, bye Brandon Ayuk," and I said that at the beginning. I now think, because of the type of player that Pearsall is, they're more likely to deal Debo, won't you think? Because Pearsall, his versatility, he's able to do those Debo type things, like because he can run the ball, he can run as a wide back, he can do all those interesting things. Having watched him at ASU when he was here, doesn't it feel like that they're going to end up paying Ayuk and then dealing Samuel?
Yeah, probably, but it'll be interesting to see if they can do that, if they can get anything for him, because the reality becomes, that contract is going to eat up a lot of space for them, and then what are they going to get? Are they going to even get a third round pick? It's probably going to be a fourth that converts to a third based on playing time and things of that nature.
That was the other surprise, is that none of those players got traded. T didn't get traded. I didn't get traded. Tebow getting traded. Nobody got none of the players got traded.
I think that said a lot about the wide receiver class.
Yeah,
that teams were more willing to stick and pick or trade up. I mean, we saw the Bills, the Chargers, the Jets. All these guys make moves up. Specifically, I mean, the Broncos on day 3 to go get Troy Franklin, right? Like, all of these guys made moves to go up to get wide receivers instead of trading for somebody that's very talented but very expensive, or going to be very expensive. And I think that's the new NFL is that, yes, guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, the true alpha, CeeDee Lamb, the true wide receiver ones, those guys are going to get paid, but the reality becomes other guys that are very, very good high-end number 2s, low-end number 1s, they're going to be the overpays now, right? They're going to be the Christian Kirks, those guys that have to go somewhere else to get their second contract, because you really can't afford to pay both. And I think that's what we're seeing. And with the implementation of how, pass heavy everything is down to youth football, where you're running 7s from the time you're 8 years old on, and you're running routes 6 days a week, every weekend. I think just the receiver position is going to continue to be flooded. And the thing that's always going to happen about that, Jess, is Ricky Pearsall's not going to get judged on what he does. If Ricky Pearsall ends up being a 700 to 900 yard a year guy with another 150, 200 yards rushing, 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns, people are going to be like, he's going to be a nice player. But if Ladd McConkey ends up being a 1,200 yard a season with 10 touchdowns a season type of guy, people are going to be like, can't believe you picked Ricky Pearsall over Ladd McConkey. And that's going to happen with Marvin Harrison. That's going to happen with Malik Neighbors. That's going to happen with Rome McGowan. Right? Like, if Marvin Harrison is a 1,200 yard a year guy and Malik Neighbors is a 1,500 yard a year guy, it won't matter that Marvin's a 1,200. Like, nobody's going to be like, oh, it'll be like, I can't believe you didn't take Malik Neighbors. Like, that's how things get judged now. And let's be honest, when Xavier Worthy puts up 1,600 yards in year 2, because he's playing for the Chiefs, people are going to be like, I can't believe he was the 5th wide receiver off the board. And you're going to be like, really?
That was another one of the guys that I hit for team. I didn't have him going. I had him going with the 32nd pick. But my goodness, what a fit! What a fit there. You've already got Travis Kelce. Then you got Hollywood Brown. I assume Rashee Rice is going to be able to play this year, most of the year at least.
Yeah, that'll be the interesting one. But
But
like you said, you
that
got all that other
speed,
stuff.
the
Oh
speed in
yeah.
that wide receiver room, Rice, Worthy, and Hollywood, those are absolutely all three of those burners. And good luck, AFC.
Right. And so it's just going to be really interesting to see how that all plays itself out, because I mean, we're just talking about just that this was just such a intriguing draft, and it tells us, and we'll get into the Cardinals discussion in a little bit. It tells us about next year's draft too.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of C Red podcast, special our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the Cardinals draft. We'll do day one, we'll do day two, we'll do day three. We'll start with the 2 first-round picks the Cardinals made. Coming up next on Rise of C Red. We're back on the Rise of C Red podcast, special our Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals made 2 first-round picks. I think the most important thing that happened with the draft is that in round 1 they made no trades, and I think at the end that was always going to kind of be the thing, although I did find it interesting that Minnesota did offer all three of they offered the 2 ones and next year's ones to the Patriots to go up to 3, although they did want a pair of mid-round picks back from the Pats to do that. And the way Monty Austinfort talked, he said there wasn't anything that was going to get us. It wasn't anything significant enough to get us off the pick number 4. They were locked in. They were locked in on Marvin Harrison, and which, after last year when they made the pick, when they made the trade, we said for a long time. I mean, Will Anderson, he's a home run pick. Just don't overthink it. Take Will Anderson. Marvin Harrison was more of a no-brainer. And C.J. Stroud even mentioned it when the Cardinals were up. Is like, just be smart. And they got the guy. They got Marvin Harrison. I don't think there's nothing to not like about the pick. Like, there's always things almost always something you can nitpick about things. Even like the Bears taking Caleb Williams. There's questions you have about him. I don't think there is one thing that you can talk about Marvin Harrison's game or about the person and really kind of nitpick it at all, other than maybe saying Malik Neighbors is more explosive after the catch. There's nothing about Marvin Harrison's athleticism that he's explosive and fast. You might just say that, okay, Neighbors is just scarier once he gets the ball in his hands.
Yeah, and it's just one of those. Yeah, and it's just one of those things that you look at what the Cardinals needed, and I don't want anybody to ever think that I'm saying, you don't take a player like Malik Neighbors because of Greg Dortch. I truly, and that's not a shot at Greg Dortch. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, when you look at what the Cardinals needed as a wide receiver, there was a player that immediately filled every single void in that way, and that was always Marvin Harrison. And that's not to say that Rome Odunze couldn't have done it. That's not to say that Malik Neighbors couldn't have done it. But if you look at exactly what the Arizona Cardinals needed at the wide receiver position, what they were lacking, they got that in Marvin Harrison. And so what ends up happening, and I know it's, people can debate and look at things however they want, and twist and turn, and the reality is, and my buddy Matt Harmon does reception perception, and so he grades all of these guys, and whether you agree with his grades or not, I guess is how you'll end up judging all of this. But he drops charts, he does all this stuff, and when it all came down to it, there was literally one player that was the alpha. And there was not a single player that was, quite frankly, in this class that was close to him. And that doesn't mean that he's going to be the best. It just doesn't. I mean, that happens all the time. There's nothing against it. But, Matt works very diligently at all of this. And again, using his data, his information. So I don't want anybody to think that this is mine. This is truly, truly not mine. But when you look at it, Matt dropped his top, I want to say 10. I'm double checking so I can quote this right. But top 10 over the last like 5 years. And the number one guy was Marvin Harrison. And so that is, so you've got a guy that has the last 2 years lined up at all three positions, and I'm just like double checking my numbers, make sure I'm not crazy. 105 snaps in 2022 in the slot, so played all over in the slot, but in the slot. 646 snaps out wide, 348 on the left, 298 on the right. So again,
he's played X, Z, and the slots, that's kind of awesome.
Right. And then this year you look at it again, virtually the same breakdown. 117 in the slot, 528 out wide, almost a 50-50 split this time, left and right out wide. 528, so 257 left, 271 right. That again, a lot of that goes to quarterback, right? Like you all of a sudden you're like, Kyle McCord does this better, so we're going to do this more. And that's just, that's just how it broke down this year. When you look at a guy like Rome Odunze, he had 147 snaps, 737, almost, again, virtually both sides. So, again, a guy that lined up on both sides of the ball this year. Last year was a little less in the slot, again, out wide quite a bit. So he's done it as well. And he graded really well, but he wasn't, I don't want to say as close, because again, that's being disrespectful, but like there was a clear consensus guy at one. I believe, and I'm trying to find his information, but I believe Rome was actually his second wide receiver in this class. And I think, finally, here we go. All right. So Marvin was 1. Jamar Chase was 2. So these are last several drafts, obviously. Rome was 3. And then Malik was 8. And again, that's not to take anything away from Malik. I know there's a lot of people that were like, oh, he's wide receiver 1. But again, you're talking about a guy in Marvin who, 2 people that have, spent their last several years, breaking this down. He is a guy that grades out as the best wide receiver that they've graded. This year, for Malik, he played half his snaps in the slot. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. But to utilize him, to get him at his best, that's something that you're going to want to do more. And again, if you're building the perfect Cardinals offense, having Malik Neighbors, if you have Michael Wilson and DeAndre Hopkins, might be the better option, right? Like that's something you look at and you go, okay, maybe Malik is the answer. But when you have Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch and then Jess Root as your other outside wide receiver, like
replace Jess, please.
Right. The option isn't, and again, it's not to say that you're going, hey, you're saying Greg Dortch should keep you. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying Greg Dortch is at least a playable player consistently. Their other option at outside receiver is not exactly where you wanted to be coming into the year. So you wanted a guy that was more of an outside, like you said, has plenty of experience running from the slot, can play X or Y. I mean, because that's the question that it comes down to, Jess. Do you want Zach Pascal or no. Chris Moore?
No.
And so that's what you're looking at. And so it just made sense from the jump. They made the call. I think it fits, man. I think it fits what they want to do. I think it fits who they are. And what's really interesting, Jess, is not that they made the pick or anything like that. It's that whoever my guy is that told me was 100% accurate from February when he told me they're going to pick Marvin Harrison Jr. Like it would literally take a team moving heaven and earth for them to come off Marvin Harrison Jr. And that wasn't to say that they didn't love other players or that they didn't scout. It was just like
all that is just a testament to exactly how good a prospect Harrison is. Like you see everything on the field. You see there's no weaknesses in his game, and then you learn about the person. He's like it's crazy to say this. He's like a young Larry Fitzgerald because he doesn't have the diva mentality. He is so humble. That doesn't mean he isn't driven to be great. He wants to outdo his father. He wants to outdo Larry Fitzgerald. But he's not going to be a problem. He's not going to call out. He's not going to say, "Give me the damn ball." He's just going to put himself in a position that you can't not throw him the ball. It is as perfect a pick in a situation especially for what they needed. My goodness, it was just refreshing. It's the one time that I had a draft ready and all written. I just had to press. There was nothing I had to worry about.
No, I'm with you. I wrote that at about 2:30 on Thursday afternoon, and I didn't pre-write a trade scenario. Like that's the confidence level I went in with of like, nah, it's just, I mean, and that's the thing is like not saying that there wasn't a smart trade to be made or that they couldn't have done X, but like they got the consensus best player in the draft. I think on the consensus board, he was number 1 overall on the one Arif Hassan does. I'll double check in case I'm speaking out of school, but I think he was the number 1 player overall. And that just makes it, again, that much better that they were able to do that and that they were able to, make that work out. And now you go in and you're like, all right, how's the rest of the draft unfold? And I think that's where things became interesting because I think we learned a lot, like I said, about this overall, this group overall. And yes, Marvin Harrison Jr. was the overall number 1 consensus prospect in the draft.
Yeah. That brings us to their second pick in the first round, number 27 overall. And I got to give a shout out to Peter Schrager, who seemed to be on top of this pick in both of his mock drafts. And it was a pick that it didn't surprise me, although I was surprised that they didn't move up. I was surprised that they didn't. I was prepared, and with some of the reports that came out to watch for the Cardinals that they had cornerback and edge were a priority and were prepared to move up from 27 to do it. When some of those pass rushers were falling, I'm like, this is the perfect time. And then the cornerbacks were falling, and so I thought it was going to be cornerback. I thought it was going to be Cooper DeJean. I thought it was going to be Kool-Aid. I thought it, or honestly, Nate Wiggins would have made a lot of sense. And he ended up going number 30 to the Ravens. But Darius Robinson, depending on how you had him classified, you saw some pre-draft stuff listing him as a defensive lineman, some listing him as an edge. At the combine, he was listed and among the defensive linemen. The Cardinals announced him as a defensive tackle. So we can anticipate he will be, and this is kind of like thing. Okay, so in what I envision for Darius Robinson is if we get a full season of LJ Collier and he does what we saw him doing in practice and in training camp, that Darius Robinson is intended to be the starter. LJ Collier will be gone after next year, and Darius Robinson does that same sort of thing. I'm not saying that he's not going to be a starter. He's not going to, but that's kind of, he makes LJ Collier unneeded. And I think had somebody had in Seattle, they felt, had they tried to just move him inside earlier, he might have had assuming he doesn't get hurt every single year but one, he has a better career already.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Jess, because I think he's going to play, that pseudo defensive end, which is like a 5'6" tech, so more outside on the tackle type thing. But it's really like an interior defensive lineman in a 34 look, or he'll be like the strong side defensive end in the base 4-3, right? So they have some options with him, and I think that's what they liked about it, is that he presents some interesting opportunities for them. And one of the things you have to do all the time and to try and understand picks and players and things like that is go back and look and you say, okay, how did the Philadelphia Eagles, I'll figure out the team I'm trying to talk about, the Philadelphia Eagles set up, so we know Hassan Reddick was the kind of edge pass rusher, right? So he wasn't really that that in guy or anything like that. And then you had Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham, kind of the more base end type of guys, playing on the edges where Hassan was maybe, and I think you would agree, is kind of more what they're envisioning for like a BJ Ojolari, right?
Yeah.
So you've got two bigger ends in Zaven and now Darius, and then you've got two big bodies in the middle in Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones, their new signing guys. And so that's the thing, is their base ends in Sweat and Graham in that defense. They were playing, and again, they played 20 games, so don't take this with like a full, don't take this as gospel, because I'm trying to do the math, but they played roughly 50 to 60% of those snaps. So that, I think, is what they're still envisioning, right? They're still envisioning having guys rotate quite a bit. And so, like you said, now all of a sudden you've got LJ Collier. Now all of a sudden you've got BJ Ojolari. You've got Dennis Gardeck. You've got all of these guys that can all fit the pieces of the puzzle. And it doesn't mean that Darius Robinson's going to play 60% of the snaps. It might mean that he plays, 60% of the snaps on that base defensive end, and then maybe he plays, 15 to 20% of those snaps as a interior defensive lineman. Now, as a rookie, I would imagine he's closer to 50% of snaps.
Yeah.
Like that's just fairly standard for defensive linemen in general, unless they are, an elite prospect.
And what's really fun about this is, remember this time of year when we were talking about the defensive line depth, and it was paper thin. Well, this defensive line room now, you feel really good about the talent in the room, because you've got you're going to have competition, and you're not just doing just bodies. Right now, Roy Lopez looks like number 6 or 7, and Roy Lopez is a legitimate starting defensive tackle in the NFL for your average team. So now you've got LG Collier, Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, Kyrus Tonga, Dante Stills, Roy Lopez, and then you add Darius Robinson, and then you've got the smattering of just the guy, Phil Hoskins and Naquan Jones and Ben Stilley, those guys that you'd never heard of but ended up playing significant time last year. This defensive line room looks really talented now, and it's hard not to get excited about a player like Darius Robinson, but doesn't he he doesn't have the same mentality. He doesn't have the same darkness to him the darkness in the life of Darnell Dockett helped him become a fierce football player. And but I think Darius Robinson has that same sort of dog in him.
Yeah, and I don't know if I told you this, but I've been working really hard on like comps after after the fact because once we actually get players, I'm like, I'll work harder at this than I was before. And the nice thing is, and again, this is like incredibly high end. This is if everything goes exactly right in his career and he becomes this type of player. But he is on the same spectrum as an athlete and style as Cam Hayward coming out of Ohio State. Cam Hayward was 6'5", a little heavier at 294. But
And
remember,
Robinson
Hayward,
has played, 2 years ago, Robinson played at 305. He dropped to
right,
285 this last year. So it'll be interesting where I think at 285 is a really good playing weight for what I envision him doing. He's not going to be able to have the versatility rather than bulking him up to 295 and losing a little bit of speed.
yeah.
285, I think Frosty Rucker played at about 285 his career, and Frosty Rucker played a really long time.
Right. And that's kind of where you're looking at for him. And so if that was, again, if that's his high end, and that's, that is extremely, and, that's no disrespect to Cam Hayward. That's an extremely, extremely high end career. I mean, you're talking about a 6-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All Pro. He's had seasons with 12, 10, 10 and a half sacks as kind of a interior defensive end, defensive lineman type. Like that would be unbelievable. And you're talking about a guy they took at the 31st pick. So right in that same range, on the same scale, you get guys like Frosty, you get guys, that were around for a long time. And I know nobody wants to hear that as like his where he ends up because it's not sexy, right? But it's not bad. And that's what people don't get. Like you when you do comps, and this is what I always say about comps, man, that drives me insane. When you do comps and you come away with thinking that every guy is going to be a all pro, and then they just play 8, let's be honest, they get a second contract for your team. And you're like, well, he's never had over 6.5 sacks. It's like, dude, he helped transform this defense into a very solid defense. Like, what are you complaining about? A name that really stands out as like a hopefully low end comp. But again, it's not a bad one. But Jared Odrick came in at 6'5", I think he was about 300 pounds. So again, a little bit heavier. But Odrick played 7 years, had 6 sacks, 5 sacks, and he missed his entire rookie season with an injury. So it wasn't like he was like a bust. Had 6 sacks, 5 sacks, 5.5 sacks. Like, again, if that's your low end where you're a guy that played 5 years and then got a second contract in the NFL, and then whereas the only reason you're out of the league after 7 years was because of injuries, like that's not a bad thing. Now, obviously, the goal is that he just doesn't get injured, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Special Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on to day 2 of the draft, where they had 2 trades, 5 picks. That's coming up next on Rise of Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, Special Cardinals Talk on the Web. We knew Monty Ossenfort couldn't not do it the whole time, and so the trades happened on day 2. They moved back from the 35th pick, even though like when day 2 of the draft started, we were like Cooper DeJean, and then he traded back. Picked up an extra 3rd round pick and then gave up their 6th round pick, which, it was okay. Giving them 4 3rd round picks. And then they ended up with Max Melton. A cornerback that was actually you were really, really high on, that a lot of the analytics guys are really, Doug Farrar, really high on Max Melton. And so once you got past the names like Cooper DeJean and Nate Wiggins, but you got Max Melton, and honestly, aside from perhaps missing out on, because they didn't go up and get one of those edge guys, and you still got Darius Robinson, to get a cornerback like Melton, especially with the athleticism that he's got, and this is a kid who, like, and he talked about it on his conference call to think, like, he guarded Marvin Harrison Jr. and guarded him very well when he played him.
Yeah, and I think we talked about Melton on the podcast. I'm like 90% sure. I love this kid, and I gave a comp, and I know it's not going to make Cardinals fans like, oh, stand up and cheer, but he has a very good career comp of Robert Alford.
Oh, yeah, size, athleticism. Robert Alford, extremely athletic. But, we remember Robert Alford hurt every year, but the one year he was healthy, he played quite well. And if we recall, every year in training camp before he got hurt, he was the best cornerback on the field, and he played really well in Atlanta before he signed with the Cardinals.
Right, and there was a couple things about Alford that really stick out to you, right? First off, he was old as a rookie, Jess. Old. 25 years old as a rookie. Oh, goodness. So he was very old as a rookie. And you look at his prime year, so 25 to 29, most guys are in their prime that time. You look at those numbers, Jess, and so we'll take out his year 25 because he was a rookie. But you look at Alford's time from 26 to 29, so a 4-year span. He had 3 interceptions and 12 passes defensed. He had 2 interceptions and 15 passes defensed. And then his 28 and 29 year, he had 2 interceptions and 19 passes defensed, and then he had 1 interception and 20 passes defensed. This was a guy who was insanely productive on the ball, was a legitimate corner one in the NFL with great, like you said, great size, great speed, great length, all of that. And he just got to the Cardinals, and like you said, we remember him as injured, but the reality was he was old. And I know people will be like, well, 31 isn't old. No, 31 is very old for a cornerback at that. Like, there's very few corners that you sign at 31 that you're like, hey, we got our guy. And so that's one of the biggest things for Melton, is that he's 3 years younger for Alford. So if you talk about his prime being that 26 to 29, and then you give him 4 additional years before that, you're talking about a guy that, again, could be a true, cornerback 1, extremely high-end corner 2 in his career. Now, there are even better comps, but again, we try not to go overly high-end. But he does have some similarities to guys like Denzel Ward, who's been an All-Pro, and Marshawn Lattimore. So again, those are the extreme high end. Your low ends, we're not going to worry about. But if you can get a Robert Alford right there in the second round, man,
wasn't Alford a second round pick too? He was a pick.
He was a second round pick, Jess, and that's and you know what? You look back and you don't know these things, you don't remember these things. I would wager that Alford would have gone higher. Remember, he went to
Southeastern Louisiana or something like
that.
That.
Right. So he wasn't at a big school, and he was 25. I don't think people realize that. Like, 25-year-olds don't get drafted early.
Especially like even now with the COVID years, they're still like, yeah. And that was one of the things you and Justin talked about. You're like, they're old. And when you day 1, day 2, you really want the younger guys. And last year, that was a perfect example. As while I really liked Keon White in the second round as a pass rusher, he was already 24 or was about to turn 24. And B.J. Ojulari, and when I went back after drafted, like, oh, I could have had Keon White. And then I go and look at their age. BJ's 21. You're like, oh, that makes sense.
Right. So, it's one of those things, man. I love the Melton pick. He is, and that's the thing that people don't really know about Robert Alford. That's like, that's why, again, it's really hard to like comp a guy to him, because when you come out at 5'11", 190, but you have 70 percentile arms, you're a sub 4.4 with elite jumps. Like, it's a very like beyond excellent prospect. And Melton's bigger, Melton's longer, Melton's faster, Melton's more explosive. I mean, we're talking about a 90th percentile in the vert and the 98th percentile in the broad jump. This is an explosive athlete. 32 and an eighth inch arms puts him in the 75th percentile for cornerback. So even though he's only 5'11", I say that in quotes, you're talking about a guy that's extremely long. That
he's got the arms of someone who's 6'1".
Right. So somebody, and it looks like a pick, just that is tailor-made for what Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rawlis want for the defense. A guy that can go back, make plays on the ball, a guy that can come up, help in the run game, can play inside, outside, has done it all at Rutgers. I know Rutgers isn't a great program, but I think I said this either on our podcast or the other podcast. They're the team every year that you're like, how did they get two guys drafted and they suck so bad? Like, that's who Rutgers is. And so I love this pick. Nobody was a bigger Cooper DeJean fan than me. Nobody. But you and I literally got a text at 3:30, and the draft started at 4, and it was like, it's going to be a cornerback, and you and I are like, yay, and they're like, not Cooper DeJean. And we're like, oh. and so then it was like, you and I are sitting like just firing names off.
Right, we were. Like, literally, that's what we were doing.
We were like, okay, what about this guy? What about, and then it was Melton, and I was like, hey, that was like my first like thought after. Right. That was my first thought after they said it wasn't going to be Cooper. It was like, oh, Max Melton fits everything that we're talking about. Long, super athletic freak, ultra competitive. Like, that was, I just thought it was a great pick. And adding that 4th, 3rd round pick kind of freed them up to do some interesting things in round 3.
Right. And now I will say, when they picked up the 4th, 3rd round pick, I was like, this is a lock. They're trading up into the 2nd, right? They're trading up into the 2nd, and I was thinking, and where I was going, okay, pass rusher, because you're thinking Jonah Ellis, you're thinking, the second tier of pass rushers that we talked about on the preview show. And no, they used all 4 of their draft picks, although their first 3rd round pick, again, so I basically am in love with their first 4 picks, and then I really only kind of like one pick after that. After that, I'm very like, after the Trey Benson pick, Tip Ryman I thought, like, I was surprised it was a 3rd round. We'll talk about that. And then kind of all of Dave, okay, that's not true. I like 2 picks after Trey Benson, but one was about right. One was, okay, it was a surprise in round 3. But Trey Benson, the guy that you called, that you have as your running back 1 in this class, for them to get him in the 3rd round, he's big. He's 6 foot 220 with elite speed, and he already this running back room is now fun, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because now. Does that put Michael Carter on the roster bubble, or does it push Amari DiMercato out of the position? Because James Conner's here. You've got James Conner, Michael Carter, James Conner, Michael Carter, DJ Dallas, they signed from Seattle, Amari DiMercato, and now Trey Benson in the mix is exciting. Because and I know he doesn't comp that way, but in my mind, especially with the usage, he didn't get as much. He had more usage than this guy, but because of the length and the breakaway speed, I see Kenyon Drake in him.
Yeah, and that Drake's not a bad comparison. There's some, really good high-end comparisons that we can run on him. And again, like, we try not to be overly high-end on guys because we just don't want to give you guys false hope that, like, he's a He's a future Hall of Famer. But you look at him, like you said, came out 6 foot, 221 pounds. I mean, that's fantastic size, right?
Then it's 4.39. Come on.
Yeah, 4.39. Really, really elite size and straight line speed. Vertical is never something you really worry about with a running back. If they've got a good vertical, then it's great. If they don't, it's not something you worry about. But you do worry about broad, right? Because that's an explosive movement, right? It's an explosive outward movement. So another guy that is able to do that. And then you look at his production, and we've talked about it, right? 316 career carries. So let's take out his 6 carries for 22 yards at Oregon. And let's go over
6 yards.
Yeah, carry. Right. Like, let's go over his 310 carries for just under 1,900 yards and 23 touchdowns while he was at Florida State. Over 6 yards a carry. And then last year he improved as a pass catcher, and it wasn't that he was bad in 22, right? 13 catches for 144 yards, over 11 yards per reception, but he just improved. 20 catches for 227 yards and a touchdown, 11.4 yards per reception. This is a guy who, and I know this isn't a sexy name, and so people are going to be like, what are you talking about? But this is a guy that could give you, as a mid-range outcome, like a Melvin Gordon, right? Hopefully,
that's a guy
who doesn't have those type of fumble issues. But you look at Gordon.
And Gordon before everything, when he was with the Chargers, was really good. Like, his rookie year was disappointing, but then he was really good.
Right. And so you look at his 3-year run with LA, and even really his 4-year run, but he was pretty banged up in 2019. 1,400 yards from scrimmage, just under 1,600 yards from scrimmage, and just under 1,400 yards from scrimmage. And he had 12, and 14 touchdowns. He had that injury plague 2019. And then even in Denver for 2 years, they weren't sexy by any means, but playing poorly, and we'll use that term very lightly, over 1,100 yards from scrimmage both seasons, over 10 touchdowns both seasons. Like, this is a guy that put up a 5-year stretch where he had over 6,000 yards from scrimmage in 5 seasons, and an astounding, literally, because I mean, people don't understand this, an astounding amount of touchdowns. He ended up with 58 touchdowns in those 5 seasons. Like, this was a guy that produced, and that's why I said, if that's your mid-range outcome for a 3rd-round pick, that's like a home run. He's got some higher end comps that we'll leave off for right now because we just don't like to talk about them. But like, that's a guy that has the ability and to really become a potential really good fit for the Arizona Cardinals.
You go to number 71, and they take Illinois. He's listed he's not a tackle. He played right tackle all last year out of necessity. He's a guard. Isaiah Adams, guard out of Illinois. I'll say this. I was really mad on the pick, especially if they were going to go guard. There were names that made more sense in my mind. Cooper Beebe was one. Christian Haynes is another one. Those are 2 names that got a lot of attention, not only from big draft guys, but lesser draft guys like you guys or Doug Farrar. Those were the guards that people were saying those are some mid-round, high reward type guards, and instead they got Isaiah Adams, who's kind of average athletically, but does a lot of things well, versatile. Play guard. My favorite trait, actually, about him is what Brett Bielema describes him as. He was a team captain. It's interesting because he he is Canadian, so he had a kind of an interesting route to the NFL, playing a couple of years in Canada, then going to Snow College in Utah before 2 years at Illinois, and he was a team captain this last year, only in his second year. Brett Bielema described him as a jerk on game days, which honestly, that's what you want from your offensive lineman. It's that little bit of edge. Like Will Hernandez has that. Will Hernandez is that he's kind of an a-hole. And you want that from your interior linemen. You want that for your linemen on game days. And so I kind of like it, but it's a pick that just honestly didn't move the needle for me. I will because Monty Ossenfort so far has a pretty good track record with draft picks. I'm like, okay. But in terms of excitement, I'm like, oh, a guard who's not going to play this year? Sure, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing is he not going to play, or is he going to have a chance to win that starting position?
I mean, maybe, but they've got 80 guys that they're competing for left guard.
Yeah.
Two of them, and there's guys on the roster, and there's guys who have guaranteed money, and so,
right.
I'm sure he'll have a chance to, but literally they got four or five players who are competing for that starting left guard job, and two of them, Tristan Colon, Elijah Wilkinson, are have money guaranteed to be out. I still had my eye on okay, Jonah Ellis was on the board as a pass rusher, and so if you also not only that, there in terms if you're going guard, you Cooper Beebe was there. He went 2 picks later. You had Christian Haynes out of UConn. You even had Zach Zinter out of Michigan. All those guys were on the board. So if you're looking for guard, if Isaiah Adams was not the name I expected at all.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see because, like you said, those guys all went after. I think BB profiled more as a center. Not that that's a problem. He ended up, BB measured in at 6'3", 322, but his arms are 31 and a half inches. So he might be a center only. And we've heard from the Cowboys immediately that that's where he was going to start. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Not saying that that's where they should have gone, but the Haynes one I'll agree with. It felt like he was the better prospect, but he's very short and relative obviously to other positions, but he came in at 6'2", 320, but he does a good job. Here's what I'll say. I think that a lot of it comes down to, for them, is the way that Adams played last year when he was at the guard position, because he's a guy that
he was bad at right tackle. He gave up 9 sacks.
And I think that as bad as this sounds, I do think that endears teams to guys when they're like, you did something for the team.
Yeah.
That's
how
probably,
Dennis Daly got a 2-year contract from the Cardinals.
Well, and what it did was it ended up, being one of those situations where it probably cost him, a round. Instead of being an early day 2 pick, he ends up being more of a late day 2 pick. The interesting thing is one of the guys that really liked him, in Dane Brugler, had him as the 85th overall or 85th. Yeah. 85th overall prospect in the draft. So again, a little earlier, right? But not overly early. Now to be fair, Dane did have both BB and Haynes in front of him. So it's not like we're talking out of school by saying that. But
and also I think, since I'm still thinking edge, with Jonah Ellis still on the board, you and I both like Jonah Ellis, but maybe he didn't profile. This is where we kind of learn about the front office and how they scout things, that they're building that interior line. And you talked about it when Austin Fort was first hired, if you look at the track record that the Patriots have of drafting linemen, day 2 and day 3, they turn out pretty good. And so I will reserve judgment, but for my personal grade, there would be been other players I would have preferred. The Cardinals did have the 79th pick that came from their trade in the second round with the Falcons. They moved back from 79 to 82 and got a 6th round pick back. So they got back into the 6th round, and so they moved back to number 82, and this is where they pick up Illinois tight end Tip Ryman, a guy that we both like. When I looked at his profile a few weeks ago, I'm like, I love him for the Cardinals. I had him pegged for round 4 or round 5, and so seeing him go at pick number, not even their last 3rd round pick, was a surprise for me. He's a guy who I think he's a great fit, and he fits a need perfectly, and maybe now we don't need to worry about Jeff Swaim coming back, assuming that Tip Ryman looks good in off-season workouts, because he's a 6'6", 6'5", 271 pound mammoth of a man who is a fierce blocker because he's very large, but tests like his athletic upside is incredible. And I think ultimately when it comes down to that, I guess the reason why he got selected on day 2 is probably that athletic upside. So he's like a blocking tight end, and he's a, jag tight end receiver. Like, he's very run-of-the-mill, like normal tight end. You're going to throw the ball to. He's going to, like old Zach Ertz, 7 yards down the field. But he has upside. Like, he has the potential to be a very good tight end, a very good two-way tight end. George Kittle. It's a bad comp to give in terms of expectations, but Kittle was that coming out of Iowa, wasn't he? He was just a blocker, because it was, who was it? Who was the Iowa kid that got drafted earlier? Was that?
I'll have to double check, but yeah, I mean, to your point about Ryman, right? Like, he is a guy that looks and looks the part. I guess that's the first kind of best way to post that, right? He's a guy that you look at, and
he's not the lean, long Dan Arnold. He's
right.
A beefy, thick, 270-pound man.
Right. And so those guys, they come out, and he was just a monster of a player, and he is a guy that, again, I think a lot of this comes down to being selfless. He's a guy that didn't care that he wasn't getting targets. I mean, 19.
And he said, there's a quote that's like from the combine. Did he want more catches? Yeah, but like, I like this from a perspective. You could tell he's a very religious man. He's like, I'm honoring God with what he gave. It would be a waste for me. I'm summarizing this. Paraphrasing this, it would be a waste for me to not move men around with the way I'm built. And so I honor him by blocking like this.
Right. And that's the thing about him, man, is he is just a guy that he wants to be physical. He wants to move people. He wants to be a badass consistently. And that's, and that's what he said. Like, one of his quotes that Dane Brugler has is, "In my flesh, of course, I wish I got the ball more, but I understand my role, and all I want is to help the team win." Yeah. And so it's like, this is a guy that, he understands that. Guess who the breadwinner is at tight end? It's going to be Trey McBride.
Yes, it will.
But guess what you can do? We'll give you 2 passes a week. You can catch, 35 passes over the course of a season for 400 yards and maybe 3 touchdowns. And you're going to be able to block people for James Conner and Trey Benson and Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison, so they get all the glory, and you'll be the guy that's, doing all the work. And that's his modus operandi, and he does it to perfection.
Right. I love the pick. I was surprised it was that high. I don't, obviously, draft grades are different. I think pretty much everyone probably felt Ryman was a day 3 guy. But, I mean, I'm not going to, because he is a perfect fit. We've said, now, what we said is the Cardinals need a veteran blocking tight end. They have a blocking tight end. They have a guy who's going to come in. He's not deficient in blocking at all. It's just a matter of whether he is smart enough, if he's intelligent enough to pick up his assignments and recognize them early and not be the mistake queen, the mistake king that Trey McBride was as a rookie. And then we go to pick 90, the 4th pick that they had in the 3rd round. I was so shocked they didn't trade up into the 2nd, but Elijah Jones, one of the corners you talked about, long, extremely athletic, out of Boston College, a little bit older, but very elite number. And not only that, but his on-ball production, like you said, incredible. The amount of balls that he got his hands on. Did miss 4 games on a personal issue last year that he would not elaborate on. The teams know about it. The team knows about it, so obviously they were okay with it. You like that pick. When they didn't get Cooper DeJean, when they didn't get Nate Wiggins, when they didn't get Kool-Aid McKinstry, to then later on get both Max Melton and Elijah Jones, that makes you feel a lot better. And you look at the room that they have, you're suddenly seeing. And when they picked for Elijah Jones, I'm saying they just upgraded Star Thomas, because Star Thomas is also that long, athletic guy. Elijah Jones is a better version of Star Thomas.
Yeah, and one of the profiles he comps out to really well is Sean Murphy Bunting. So, I mean, you got a guy that, like you said, he was elite production on the ball, last year, so 2022, 15 passes defense, 2 interceptions. This year, 13 passes defense, 5 interceptions. I mean, that's, again, elite production for the last 2 years, 20 games, 28 passes defense, 7 interceptions. That's insane production. Like
5 picks in 9 games last year. Woo!
Right. Yeah, he's a guy that just does a great job as in man. He can play press man. He has a lot of athletic tools, and he just needs to be coached, man. He's a little undisciplined. I don't know if that has anything to do with missing the games or not. Like you said, it doesn't matter. The team was comfortable with it. He's a guy that can be a little undisciplined at times, which is fine. But he also is a very good punt gunner,
Yes.
which means that he can get on the field immediately in 2024.
Oh, something to note about Max Melton that also wasn't. It was Melton wasn't who's blocked 4 punts, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so they not only did both their day 2 cornerbacks, they have high end on defense. They can go in and immediately be impact players on special teams. Yeah, Jones was a starting gunner, which you love to see, especially when if you can get those young players. And if we remember, like Budda Baker didn't have a spot in the lineup when he was drafted in the 2nd round. He made his money on special teams that first year. In fact, I'm 100% sure that him being a Pro Bowl special teamer set the stage for how he is viewed by players around the league to get Pro Bowl votes later on. Because once you've been to the Pro Bowl, it's easy to get voted back in. And having done it as a rookie, as a special teamer, people already knew him. But that's neither here nor there. But to see both cornerbacks. And so Elijah Jones, yeah, I was okay with that pick. I had no problems with it. Coming next on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's come back and talk about their Day 5 selections. That's coming next on Rise of Seaward. We're back on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Day 3 of the draft, they had 5 more selections, only one of which I was really all that excited about, and that was their 4th round pick, Dadrian Taylor Demerson, or Rabbit, as he's known as, has been known since he was about in 1st grade. Safety out of Texas Tech. Fantastic selection. I bet he will play this year as the third safety. Like when they used Andre Sacheret last year, he will be their big nickel guy for some things, depending on how they use the cornerbacks issues. Like last year, they used Jalen Thompson in the slot a lot, at least until late in the year, when then Garrett Williams took that over. Now, we can use, isn't Rabbit kind of the, while you've got Jalen Thompson, you've got Budda Baker, he's a real true deep half safety and gets his hand on a lot of balls as well.
Yeah, again, his production as a safety is insane. I mean,
Ridiculous.
he is a different
10 interceptions and 33 passes defensed in 3 years.
Yeah, and to understand that, like, that's 38 games, 43, getting hands on ball situations by a safety is unheard of. So, he's rangy. He's an elite athlete. We talked about him on the show.
He's built like Budda.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is that he is a little over aggressive, and that's why these guys end up being in late day 2, early day 3 picks like Jones and DTD. But the reality of the situation is you can't teach what he does, and that's elite on ball production and athleticism to spare. I mean, the biggest issue with him might just be that he doesn't understand that. And at 197, he's not really undersized, but he is fearless. And that is sometimes to their detriment. But I've seen some people compare him to Tyrann Mathieu. I think that's, again, a slightly unfair, overly gracious type of comparison to a guy that is a borderline Hall of Fame player. But
I will say this is that Eric Galco from the Shrine Bowl said that he's a day one nickel starter. They didn't sound like Monty and Gannon didn't sound like they viewed him as a nickel guy. They viewed him back half.
Yeah, and that's the thing is he is flexible in what he does. And you look at guys that have that have some comps like him, and one of them is Cam Taylor-Britt, who's been very good for the Bengals, I believe. He went in the second round, played in 12 games this year, had 4 interceptions and 11 passes defense. So again, a guy with elite on-ball production, can't be coached, really can't be overlooked. And like you said, those elite measurables and times make him a really intriguing high-end prospect.
And he's we said it was the perfect pick for a guy that we said, hey, if the Cardinals are going to draft a safety, you'd want someone with a high-end potential to potentially start in 2025 if they let Budda go. And that's exactly what Rabbit is. Like, he has the potential to slide into that role if the Cardinals decide to let Budda leave after 2024. So that was kind of a perfect spot. You go to the 5th round, they had 2 picks. The first of those 2 were edge Xavier Thomas out of Clemson. I thought it was a very interesting pick. One, I didn't know anything about him. Not a guy that I had on my radar from the pass rushers, even on day 3. There were a couple other guys that I had, like Brennan Jackson's guy. I keep going back to Washington. It's like pick up Brennan Jackson, and then nobody picked up Brennan Jackson. And so Thomas, who has good athletic measurables. He was also a Shrine Bowl guy. Very good first step, and was one of the most highly recruited players in 2018 in the entire country. I think he was the number 3 prospect in the entire nation.
Yeah.
And after a couple of years, COVID, like, he basically had a reset year. He caught COVID. He got sick. He ballooned to 300 pounds. He was in a really bad spot. And then over the last 2 years, he kind of bounced back. You could tell from his photo, like, he's not a chiseled athlete. Like, you could see on his body, he looks on the pudgy side. I don't know if that's going to change when he gets to the NFL. But 265, 270 is probably what he's going to have him play at. He has a high athletic upside, but sack production is not there. Like, he never had more than 3.5 sacks, although I think Doug Farrar I didn't look it up, but I think had him listed as having 43 pressures this last season. So he was an incredibly productive, disruptive pass rusher. It'll be interesting to see upside. For me, without knowing more about the pick, I wasn't super excited about it, especially because they waited so long to address the position.
Right. He comps out to a guy that's been in the NFL for a while, that went in the fourth round, so similar area. And, in 6 seasons has 14 sacks. Last year, we can kind of throw out his rookie year as a fourth rounder, and then last year he was injured. But guy by the name of Marquise Haynes, who plays for the Jaguars, after his rookie year, he had 1, 4, 3, and 5 sacks. So again, not a terrible production. That 22 season, remember that Carolina team wasn't awful. They were awful the next year. And so if you get that out of Xavier Thomas, that's obviously like just striking gold.
Yeah.
His highest end comp is a guy like D Ford. We're so far out of range on a comp like that like it's not even something that we try to bring up. But like if he ends up being on the Marquise Haynes level, I think
honestly, and I'm coming around to it. If he can do what Victor Dimukeje did last year and do it for more than just one season, then I guess it's not a bad pick.
Right, exactly.
You go to their second at number 162, Texas tackle Christian Jones, a guy that doesn't have a lot of experience. He was a soccer player, and had dreams of being on the national team, and being a really big kid, he ends up going to play football. He's now up to 300 something pounds. He gained a lot of weight in college. Plays tackle. There's a lot of guys that love the pick. They call him one of the value picks. After the Dorian Johnson experience that we had, I'm not willing to call him like your steal as a plug and play guy. Plus, that part of that's just because the Cardinals are set at tackle. He's going to compete for a spot on the roster. He's the guy that I'm going to look at and say he might not make the team, and it's only because of what you and Justin have told me about, and it's that the offensive lineman 8-second 3-cone. And while he has a good 40, he has a really good 40. Was it like 504 or 509 or something like that? Christian Jones' 40 time was really good. His 3-cone was really bad. It was 809 at the combine, and then he redid it as pro day, and it was 8 seconds flat. Now, Dorian Johnson was 839, so he was exceptional. Like, that's another almost half a second difference. But that analytic number, that's the kind of red flag. So I'm already going into this season, he's going to have to overcome this red flag. So if he doesn't move well, I'll understand why. And so there's a lot to like about the pick, except for you're overlooking that athletic red flag, in my opinion.
Right. And you look at it, I mean, his high-end comp is like an Orlando Franklin, who had a really nice career, but was drafted 3 rounds higher and started a lot of games, 89 games in the NFL, started either, tackle or guard. He projects more as a right tackle type. The problem becomes is that guys like this, like you said, they tend to not hit in the NFL. We got a couple of them recently. One is Lucas Niang, the kid out of TCU that I think was drafted in the 3rd round. Again, not great testing numbers, kind of stiff, never worked out. And so that's the concern with him. But again, when you have a comp like Franklin, it's not a death note. It's just, you got to get there, man. Like it's not, and you got to remember too, you're talking about a guy that was drafted in the 5th round. So realistically, you're talking about a guy that's probably at best in his career going to be a backup swing tackle. And if you get that as a 5th rounder and he's a guy that sticks around, for a long time,
like
I don't think that there's any.
If he can replace Kelvin Beachum, like maybe they keep him on the practice squad for a year, and then he's the backup tackle for the next 3 years. Okay, that's fine. There wasn't necessarily anyone left on the board that I was just like, you gotta get. Some names that, and I'm looking at the rest of round 5, and there was no one other than like Texas's Jalen Ford that I was like, okay, yeah, I guess that works. But there wasn't. That's just I didn't like that there was the athletic red flag because it kind of went against what they did last year, which was high athleticism. They bet on high athleticism, and they did that early in the draft as well. So they got guys that had a high athletic upside, and here they have a guy that, while the 40's good, there's that 3-cone red flag, and maybe if that's the only thing that's wrong with him, it's just something to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, there's got to be guys at the end of the draft, and they rarely hit, like we always talk about, their lottery tickets, and then
Tayshaun Palmer, TJ Palmer out of UAB, receiver. That was a pick. I'm like, wait, who? And again, you're looking like you said it before the show. We're like that screamed undrafted rookie. And maybe it was simple as this: they had 12 draft picks, and they have nearly a full roster. And we're not going to talk about the undrafted rookies really, but they made 3 rookie free agent signings. But yeah, a guy that I was surprised was still on the board that they could have gone, but and that's they'd already drafted 2 cornerbacks, DJ James out of Auburn, high athletic upside. You had the Northern Iowa defensive tackle Christian Boyd that some were trying to push him into the top 100. He goes number 199. Other than that, there wasn't anyone I was really in love with. I was still hoping for Brennan Jackson out of Washington State. There was something about him that I liked in terms of an edge, but they already got an edge. But no, here they just double up on the offensive line. They just double up at receiver, which we felt they were always going to do, right? We felt that they were going to double up at receiver, and Palmer does have some return upside. He's got good speed. And so it was kind of a, sure, why not? He's not someone I have a lot of hope for.
No, 6'2", 210. He's probably a practice squad guy. Like, you're eyeing him to be a practice squad guy. Maybe he's the guy that replaces, one of those guys we talked about earlier, right? Zach Pascal, those type of guys in 2025.
Then we go to round 7, and when they selected Caden Davis out of Miami, we all scrambled. It's like, who is he? Because there was nothing. He was not expected to be drafted. He was. I don't think he was even listed as a priority free agent, but he spent 4 years at Oklahoma playing just outside corner. He's little at 5'9". He transferred to Miami this last year where he played more. So he played a lot in the slot. He played a full game at safety, and it appears that, his versatility is what is selling him right now. And I don't know much about him other than that. And so he can play a lot of places. And a 5'9" defensive back. I hope he can play a lot. I hope he can at least be a stud on special teams, because I don't see him getting on the field. And it's going to be really, really hard for him to make this squad. Based on who they have in the quarterback room already, the fact that they drafted 2 cornerbacks ahead of him, that right there. That Jaden Davis was, hey, we've got a 7th round pick. While they said they were basing on this would have been probably a free agent for anyone else in the league, and it tells us a little bit about, hey, Monty's right. Their draft board doesn't look like anyone else's, and especially it's not going to look like what the analyst draft boards like, whether it's your PFF board, whether it's your Doug Farrar, whether it's what you and Justin do. Clearly, Monty and his staff have different views on certain things.
Right, and that's all you can look at through it. And Davis ends up being the guy that nobody knows. That, thank God, I'm buddies with Emory Hunt
and the football game plan. The only buddy, at least Brugler had a line, and what he was like 83rd cornerback.
Yeah,
something like that. So yeah, so we got a little bit of insight, and the conference call. He opened it up. He played 4 years. He knows he met Kyler because He joined Oklahoma the year after Kyler left, the year Kyler was drafted. And he met, like he said, he doubts that Kyler remembered, but he actually met Kyler when he was on his recruiting trip. That was Kyler's Heisman year. So he's an Oklahoma guy who ended up going to Miami. He's got 5 years of tape and showed some versatility. So maybe that's that. This pick didn't excite me. The Palmer pick didn't excite me. The Jones pick didn't excite me. The Xavier Thomas I'm warming on, but it definitely didn't excite me at all. Rabbit, the DTD, I really liked that pick. Ryman, I like the fit. Didn't like where they got him, but that's neither here or there at that point. I just thought they overdrafted him. It'd be interesting to see if they hadn't drafted where he would have landed if he ended up going in that same round just by someone else, because then we would be able to see where he was valued.
Exactly. So, yeah, it just ends up being an interesting draft class, right? That you have a lot of questions that we'll have to, follow along on, but it gave us, I think, some insight into what Monty, Jonathan, and the company want to do moving forward.
And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. That's our Cardinals Talk on the Web, our draft review. We should have another show later this week, and we'll talk. I mean, there's not as much to talk about, but we'll still break down stuff when it comes to our draft picks, the undrafted rookies, and things like that. So that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is the Rise Up See Red podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again in a couple days.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.